Planes are quite safe most of the time, but every once in a while unexpected problems pop up, and pilots are put to the ultimate test. These riveting incidents highlight the real bravery of pilots as they perform emergency landings to protect their crew and passengers. Whether it's due to fuel shortages or technical difficulties, these 20 most famous emergency landings show how pilots show amazing bravery and resourcefulness in trying times. Come investigate the most incredible near-crash and emergency landings ever documented with us. Number 20. Landing on North Carolina Highway. Just picture yourself as a novice pilot thrust into the terrifying situation of a freeway emergency landing. It's understandable that you would be reluctant to travel again after going through such a terrifying experience. That is precisely what occurred to Vincent Frazier in 2022 on July 4th, when his little jet lost power over North Carolina. Vincent, who had logged fewer than 100 hours of flying experience, was thrust into a life-or-death scenario when he was forced to execute an emergency landing on a heavily populated highway surrounded by traffic. Anyone would feel nervous just thinking about it. The shocking thing is that the Swain County Sheriff's Office posted GoPro video of the whole thing on their Facebook page. Vincent deftly glided down to the earth, swerving to miss power wires and many cars until he landed safely on the road. Even off the major highway, he steered the jet into a side street. It was a relief for everyone when Vincent, the only person on board, survived the incident unscathed. In light of the circumstances, Sheriff Curtis Cochran commended his perfect landing. The fact that Vincent, a former service member and native Floridian, managed to survive in such a perilous scenario is all the more astounding given that he had only just earned his pilot's license the previous autumn. Number 19. Aloha Airlines Flight 243. Even though most people imagine a tropical paradise when they think of Hawaii, Aloha Airlines Flight 243 had a far from pleasant flight from Hilo to Honolulu on April 28, 1988. The Boeing in issue had accumulated over 35,000 flying hours and over 89,000 takeoffs and landings, which is more than double its planned capacity. Because it spent most of its time flying over the damp, salty Hawaiian climate, the plane's structure suffered a serious hit. It was astonishing that no one at Aloha Airlines spotted the increasing disbandment and wear during pre-flight checks. Next, a small section of the left side of the roof came way while in flight, causing catastrophic decompression and ripping off a large amount of the top. The pilot responded quickly to the ensuing mayhem by making a beeline for the closest Maui airstrip. In spite of the terrifying hole in the plane's structure, he expertly landed the crippled aircraft. Clarabelle Lansing, a flight attendant, tragically died in the event after being crushed by the ceiling. All of the other passengers and staff members, however, made it through unscathed. The aviation industry was rocked by this incident, which garnered a lot of bad coverage and led to widespread safety measures being taken. Number 18. Southwest Airlines Flight 1380. With many flights every day, the New York-Dallas route is rather typical. Nevertheless, this route presented Southwest Airlines Flight 1380 with exceptional difficulties on April 17, 2018. A catastrophic left engine failure occurred on takeoff on this aircraft. A large section of the engine's intake and cowling severed during the failure, sending fragments flying all over the fuselage and wings. A window cracked in the ensuing mayhem, leading to a quick loss of cabin pressure. Sadly, one person was killed after being partly ejected from the aircraft, while 8 others were hurt slightly. Amidst the terrible scenario, the pilot displayed outstanding competence and coolness, expertly handling the emergency. They arrived safely at Philadelphia International Airport after navigating the damaged airplane. In spite of all the obstacles, the landing was an incredible experience. This tragedy highlighted the significance of well-trained and prepared pilots, together with the vital role that airline maintenance and safety standards play. Number 17. Florida man lands a plane. Few news stories can compare to the notorious Florida guy tales when it comes to being both weird and hilarious. But something strange happened on August 19th 2022, which changed the list in a strange way. Remy Collin was flying a 1956 Cessna 182 when the plane had an engine problem while he was out doing normal maintenance. As a result of the urgency of the situation, Collin had to make a snap choice with little time to consider his alternatives. Crash landing was his only option when the engine failed. But he decided to park the plane in a residential area rather than some secluded spot or empty field. Collin, who owns an aviation advertising agency, told reporters afterwards that he had failed to properly check the fuel gauge, which was a simple but critical omission and the cause of this disaster. Because of this, the plane's fuel tank ran dry while in the air. Collin landed on what seemed to be an empty road after making the split-second decision that he would not make it to the airport in time. The plane touched down in someone's front yard, damaging a section of fence and 2 palm trees due to the unlucky landing. Luckily, no one else was hurt, and Collin was lucky to escape the collision instead of just running out of gas and smashing into the ground. Because of the event, he became a local celebrity, but in a bad way. As a result of the unanticipated landing, he may face legal consequences. Number 16. The miracle on the Hudson River. There has never been a better footage of an emergency landing than the one that occurred in the Hudson River on U.S. Airways Flight 1549. The trip from New York City to Charlotte, which first seemed to be ordinary, became an extraordinary and memorable experience on January 15, 2009. Tragically, the Airbus A320 ran into a flock of geese not long after taking off from LaGuardia Airport, damaging both engines and putting pilots Sully and Skiles in a dangerous predicament. Realizing they had very little push, they knew a forced landing was in their future. Despite Sully's best efforts, the plane was rapidly dropping altitude, making a return to LaGuardia Airport impossible. He made a daring move by communicating with air traffic control that he was going to try a very unusual and maybe dangerous water landing on the Hudson River. 0 casualties and minor injuries were the outcome of the daring water landing, which was ultimately successful against all odds. The pilot's decision was subsequently lauded by the National Transportation Safety Board, which recognized it as the best course of action under the circumstances. The astonishing episode became the basis for a film named Sully, after it garnered extensive media coverage. The pilot's ability to stay calm and land U.S. Airways. Flight 1549 safely in the Hudson River is an inspiration. What might have been a horrible event became an incredible story of survival and bravery. Number 15. British Airways Flight 38. Problems with planes happening every once in a while are par for the course in the aviation industry. But because to its one-of-a-kind issue that manifested soon before landing, British Airways Flight 38 stood apart. No problems with the engines were detected throughout the flight's almost 100-kilometer journey from Beijing to London. But then something unexpected happened as it got closer to its target. The flight route was consistently chilly, and the crew kept a close eye on the air quality to keep the fuel from freezing at dangerously low temperatures, particularly below the crucial -40-degree mark during the whole voyage. On the other hand, the crew fooled themselves into thinking everything was okay, while the temperature remained at a consistently low 34 degrees. They were oblivious to the fact that the gasoline really included frozen water in minute proportions. The plane was getting ready to land when the frozen ice turned into slush, blocking the fuel flow in the fuel-oil heat exchangers, even though the fuel's average temperature remained at -34 degrees. An already difficult situation was made much more so when the engine stopped responding to requests for more thrust. Despite the pilot's best efforts, the jet touched down just short of the runway as it slid toward the earth. Incredible as it may seem, every single member of the crew and passengers made it through the landing unscathed. Out of the 46 people who were injured, just one had a serious injury. The complexity of flight operations and the need of comprehensive planning for many eventualities were starkly highlighted by this tragedy. Number 14. Airbus A320 Lufthansa almost crashes during crosswind approach. Snowstorms cause a lot of trouble for drivers, but they affect more than just vehicles. Such weather phenomena may likewise pose considerable obstacles to airplanes. Lufthansa Airbus. A 320 passengers en route to Hamburg in 2008 had an adventure they would never forget as a severe winter storm system ripped over Central Europe. An incredible 56 miles per hour of crosswinds forced the Lufthansa airline to make its way to Hamburg Airport. The pilot's skill in navigating this difficult circumstance was vital. The pilot had to make a split-second decision to abandon the first landing attempt because the jet slid wildly over the runway because of the high winds. This was a terrifying ordeal for everyone on board. The jet shook wildly as it neared the runway on its last landing attempt due to wind shear dragging the left wing toward the earth. The idea of a second try naturally made most people nervous. Some people were so distraught that they were on the brink of tears, according to a passenger who was on board. Nevertheless, the pilot, who was 39 years old at the time, was lauded for his exceptional skill and coolness as he weathered the second landing attempt and emergency ascension. According to a spokesperson from the German Organization for Flight Safety, this attempted landing became one of the most spectacular incidents ever documented in the history of German domestic aviation. Number 13. The Hawaii plane crash. Many individuals are afraid to travel in tiny airplanes after the 2014 incident involving a Cessna Grand Caravan in Hawaii. There were 9 people on board when the event occurred on the flight from Molokai to Honolulu. The plane suddenly stopped rising after an explosion was heard. The pilot expertly guided the aircraft to a controlled landing on the sea with the right side up, increasing the passengers' chances of survival. Luckily, Ferdinand Puentes, one of the passengers, had the good sense to document everything that happened as it happened. From his clip, we can see that the passengers were quite calm and prepared for the landing. Water rushed in as soon as they opened the door after the landing, filling the cabin to their ankles. Nevertheless, when they stepped off the plane, the passengers maintained composure and discipline. While the rest of the passengers waited for help from the U.S. Coast Guard, one of them swam to safety. Loretta Fuddy, the Hawaii State Health Director, unfortunately lost her life, but everyone else survived the event. Some accounts indicate that she may have died of heart failure while in the water, although the actual reason is still unknown. The event, which was recorded on camera, provided a fresh viewpoint on how the passengers' level-headedness and the pilot's agility played a role in their survival. Number 12. JetBlue Flight 292. The terrifying reality of flying is that the smallest detail might cause a major catastrophe. It highlights the need of engineers who conduct service inspections to guarantee everything is in excellent shape. Take JetBlue Flight 292 as an illustration of how crucial this is. Flight 292 of JetBlue set off from Burbank Airport in California bound for John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York on September 25, 2005. There were 6 crew members and 140 passengers on board the Airbus A322-32, which is 3 years old. But the flight crew ran into a worrying problem not long after takeoff. The monitoring system had given a false signal. After a thorough examination by the ground crew, it was determined that the nose landing gear was stuck at an alarming 90-degree inclination to the left and would not retract. The pilot took the critical choice to make an emergency landing at Los Angeles International Airport since there was no feasible option to continue the transatlantic voyage. A longer runway would ease stress on the landing gear and decrease the likelihood of an aircraft fire. Therefore, choosing Los Angeles International Airport was a well-planned decision. Additionally, the airport offers better emergency support services and has excellent field conditions. Flying figure eights let the pilot burn off some extra fuel before landing. Landing was nerve-wracking, but the pilot's skill allowed the plane to touch down with just flat and damaged tires on the nose gear. The further inquiry, however, came to a disturbing realization Not only had the anti-rotation lugs broken and disconnected, but 2 other lugs had fractures in them. Number 11. Emergency landing in Poland. The accolades bestowed to Captain Tadeusz Rona in 2011 are well-deserved. He was really a hero. The landing gear on his Boeing 767 was non-functional, yet he safely landed the plane at Warsaw's Frederick Chopin International Airport nevertheless. It was a difficult and stressful scenario with 231 people on board. Despite his courageous deed, Captain Tadeusz maintained an air of modesty. He was of the opinion that any pilot faced with a comparable scenario could have safely conducted the move. However, he still felt uneasy, even after he heard that everyone on board had escaped the jet unharmed. He thought about what he might have done differently in the days that followed. Everyone on board sensed the terrifying ordeal. The plane had to circle for more than an hour while the pilots and ground crew frantically looked for a way out of their jam. Tensions were already high since every passenger knew about the incident. The air was thick with smoke when the aircraft eventually came to a stop. The flight attendants quickly gave the order for everyone to get off the plane and stand as far away from it as possible. Angelika Borowska, a witness, described the emotional ups and downs that passengers experienced. Fear gripped the passengers at first, and they cried and prayed for protection. When they finally touched down, however, relief and joy supplanted the weeping. After further investigation, experts found that the wheels and undercarriage couldn't extend correctly because the core hydraulic system had broken. According to Captain Tadeusz, who had flown the plane 500 times previously, the undercarriage had always opened without a hitch until that tragic day. Number 10. Helicopter makes emergency landing in heavy traffic in 2021. While training for a military event, a U.S. Army Black Hawk chopper unexpectedly had to land in the city streets of Bucharest, Romania, capturing the attention of the public. Witnesses saw the formation's helicopter plummet to the ground in Charles de Gaulle Square after crashing into 2 light posts. Thank goodness no one was hurt during the cautious landing, as the U.S. Army Europe and Africa Public Affairs team told the public. They said the experienced crew of the helicopter and the help of the Romanian police officers on the ground were responsible for this successful landing. Nevertheless, a joint investigation was conducted by Romania and the United States to ensure safety and determine the cause of the incident. Indeed, it is rare and attracts a lot of attention to see a helicopter land on a busy road. Images and videos of the Black Hawk circling over the busy roadway before landing were widely shared online. 2 streetlights were impacted by the helicopter's rotors during the landing, and one of those lights slammed into a neighboring automobile. There were pictures of the crew outside the helicopter using their phones with the engine compartment open. Some people may feel worried about flying because of this unforeseen event. Number 9. The Cessna. 172 incidents. Flight safety is always the first concern. The need of being well-trained and careful in flying has been highlighted by 2 incidents involving Cessna 172 planes. An event occurred in 2020 at Toronto's Buttonville Airport when a student pilot made a fatal mistake while flying a Cessna 172M operated by Canadian Flyers International on his first solo flight. While trying to land the plane, the pilot erred in his assessment of its speed and control. He lost control of the jet and sent it careening into a hangar rather than coming to a safe halt on the runway. Luckily, the student pilot was unhurt, but the aircraft went down and the hangar took a beating. On Route A1A in Miami in 2022, a Cessna 172 had a somewhat worse incident. The emergency landing was conducted on the Hall-over Inlet Bridge when the single-engine Cessna had a power outage. During landing, the aircraft tragically crashed into a car. 3 persons aboard the aircraft were among the 5 wounded in this disaster. The tragic loss of life and the need to send another victim to a trauma center are very troubling. Number 8. Pan Am Flight 6. Although it may seem strange to us today, passenger flights that encircled the world were a common way of transportation in the 1950s. On October 16, 1956, Pan American Airlines experienced a terrifying incident that brought attention to the difficulties of such long trips. As plane mechanics can attest, midway through the flight from Honolulu to San Francisco, 2 out of the 4 engines on board unexpectedly failed. After discovering they couldn't go back to either location, the pilots, including Richard OGG, had to make a difficult choice. The unpopular decision to try a water landing in the Pacific Ocean was taken by OGG because there were no other good choices. The presence of the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Pontchartrain, an American weather vessel, provided some optimism, thankfully. Oggio's goal was to land the aircraft as near to the ship as possible in the hopes of rescuing as many lives as possible. After depleting the fuel supply, he meticulously circled the boat to guarantee a safe landing free of fire or explosion. The aircraft had a rough landing when its tail broke off and it turned around in a full circle while landing. Averting a possible catastrophe, OGG's quick thinking and expert landing rescued all 44 passengers. When OGG returned home, he was feted as a hero and bestowed the Civilian Airmanship Award as a token of appreciation for his extraordinary achievement. I can only begin to fathom the heart-pounding sensation of seeing one of these incredible emergency landings up close and personal. Have you ever experienced a tumultuous landing in the air? Feel free to share your tale down below. Your viewership is very appreciated. Until our next episode, take care. Number 7. Emergency landing from a stuck clutch. South of Adelaide, near Aldinga Airfield, an audacious emergency landing occurred towards the end of 2022. When the landing clutch of a Beech E-55 Baron became stuck, the pilot had a difficult scenario on his hands. Thanks to the pilot's expertise and lightning reflexes, we were lucky despite the seriousness of the situation. Circumnavigating the airport for over 2 hours before attempting the landing was a prudent move by the pilot to burn off surplus fuel and limit the chance of fire. At least 3 fire engines and the police hurried to the runway to provide aid after he informed the authorities of his plight upon arrival. The pilot deftly touched down on the airstrip, displaying remarkable ability as he or she glided over the gravel without wheels. Daphne Pengilly, a local neighbor, heard the distress call and made the decision to go to the runway. She had been observing the plane for a while when she noticed that during flybys, 1 wing and 1 nose wheel were down. The pilot finished landing and retracted the landing gear before the fire units arrived. As everyone eagerly awaited the pilot's safe arrival, the air was thick with tension. Even though it made a terrifying grinding noise as the plane's propellers and base scraped over the runway, landing was not difficult. But he stopped the Beech Baron, and everyone was relieved when he climbed out of the plane unscathed. Despite his refusal to do an interview, his performance demonstrated his competence and poise in high-pressure situations. Number 6. The Gimli Glider. Between Montreal and Edmonton, Air Canada Flight 143 faced an unusual and possibly disastrous incident on July 23, 1983. A first for a plane of this size, the Boeing 767, ran out of fuel. Because it was never anticipated that either pilot would face a circumstance when fuel was low, they had not received training on how to do so. Glider pilot Captain Robert Pearson was fortunate to have a great deal of experience. He used his one-of-a-kind abilities to guide the plane using maneuvers similar to those of a glider. He executed an emergency landing at a former RCAF base in Gimli, Manitoba, with lightning speed and pinpoint accuracy. Surprisingly, however, the landing spot was now a drag racing track, complete with throngs of spectators. Pearson skillfully navigated the aircraft over the unforeseen obstacle, solidifying the episode as one of the most extraordinary emergency landings in aviation history. A human mistake occurred during the fuel measuring procedure, according to further study. The ground personnel at Air Canada mistook the pilot's request for fuel in pounds for kilograms, since the airline was in the midst of switching from imperial to metric measures. The plane ended up with far less gasoline than needed for the flight, which turned a preventable oversight into a possibly catastrophic event. Number 5. Private plane makes emergency landing. On a dark and mysterious night, a small plane flying from New York State to Harrisburg International Airport crashed into the Susquehanna River. It was between Lower Swatara Township, Middletown, and Royalton that the accident took place, about 2 miles upstream from 3 Mile Island. The plane's engine seemed to quit working for no apparent reason just before it fell into the river. Therefore, the cause of the tragedy is still unclear. The rescue crew's first priority was getting the plane out of the sea. The fact that those on board made it out alive is a huge relief for everyone concerned. Surprisingly, the Piper PA-46's 2 passengers were able to get out of the plane and stand on a wing. The guy and lady were both hurt, but not badly. They must count themselves very lucky to have survived such a near-death experience, which might change one's outlook on life. Number 4. The Airbus. A 380 lands in a storm. For pilots, storms are the bane of their existence. Picture yourself as a pilot that wakes up to a prediction that stares back at them in the face: bad weather. With so many lives hanging in the balance, a moment of unease inevitably follows. Flying in dangerous weather is no easy feat. The pilot who expertly piloted an Airbus A380 over the fierce winds of Storm Eunice in the UK, however, is just one of many remarkable pilots. Some planes opted to divert to safer airports, but this extraordinary pilot didn't budge. And brave YouTuber recorded the really harsh weather at London Gatwick Airport in 2022. All planes had to put landings on hold for a terrifying 40 minutes due to the torrential downpour and strong winds. Numerous flights were forced to do go-arounds or be redirected to other locations. Nevertheless, in spite of this difficult situation, an Emirates flight on an Airbus A380 showed incredible restraint by patiently waiting for 45 minutes outside Brighton in a holding area. Bracing himself, the pilot faced wind gusts of up to 122 miles per hour. Without a question, the flight was dangerous and tumultuous, but the pilot's skill and poise saw them through. They landed with such composure, it must have amazed onlookers and travelers alike. Number 3. Out of the plane. A terrifying emergency landing occurred during a skydiving practice flight on July 29, 2022. Unidentified pilot and co-pilot were practicing landings when Crooks, the co-pilot, tried to take control of the plane. Landing tasks were allocated to him as he aimed to acquire his chief pilot certification. Unfortunately, the fuselage and main right landing gear were severely damaged during a hard landing on the final approach. The plane was redirected to a different location and continued to fly despite the incident. It seemed like Crooks was overwhelmed by the circumstances, even though the main pilot took charge to safely put the damaged jet down. Crooks apologized and said he needed some fresh air after the landing. To everyone's shock, he decided on the spur of the moment to leap off the plane, so terminating his life. Even though the pilot was shocked and distressed by Crooks's sudden death, he managed to land the damaged plane after it strayed into an airport field. Despite the pilot's safety, the situation was definitely upsetting because of the unexpected twist. Number 2. Plane catches fire at Miami Airport. At Miami International Airport in 2022, a horrific event occurred on a Red Air aircraft departing from the Dominican Republic. A fire broke out on the runway after the plane's nose landing gear failed during landing. Thankfully, all 126 passengers and employees were rescued as emergency services quickly put out the fire. Only 3 individuals needed minor medical treatment at the hospital, and thankfully no one died. A bus brought the remaining passengers back to the terminal without incident. According to authorities, the fire started when the landing gear collapsed. If rescue workers hadn't come quickly, the situation might have been even worse, particularly given the claims of gasoline leakage. Seeing an aircraft engulfed in flames was a terrifying and disturbing event for everyone on board and waiting for their own flights. A person's view of aviation travel may certainly be permanently altered after such an occurrence. Number 1. Qantas Flight 72. Qantas Flight 72 demonstrates that despite the increasing automation of airplane flying, These controls may sometimes lead to catastrophic failures. On October 7, 2008, passengers of Qantas Flight 72 saw this personally. For almost half of the journey from Changi Airport in Singapore to Perth Airport in Australia, the automatic controls of the aircraft worked without a hitch. But then they began giving the pilots false data, so they had to go to manual control. Sadly, this didn't fix the issue. The plane kept doing risky maneuvers that the pilots couldn't stop. In one maneuver, the aircraft dipped suddenly at an angle of 8.4 degrees. In the next, it accelerated at 0.2 Gs, while slanted at a 3.5-degree angle. And this was all uncommanded. The outcome was that 99 people on board and 8 members of the crew were injured, with 11 people on board and 1 member of the crew sustaining more serious injuries. Skillfully executing an emergency landing at Lismore Airport in Western Australia, the pilots ensured the safety of everyone on board despite the obstacles presented by the unstable controls. This event highlights the continued need of human pilots in addressing unexpected circumstances, even with enhanced automated technology. When was the last time you had to make an emergency landing? Put your thoughts down in the comment area.